Welcome back to the first installment of the budget series. This is part two of indirect costs. In this video, we will go over how to budget for indirect costs. For those who missed the first part of the first installment, I did go over what some acronyms are that I will use. Everything on this page, F&A, Facilities Administrative, IDC, ICR, overhead, all of these are those indirect costs that are associated with direct costs in a budget. Everything is based on solicitations and policies and guidelines, and we will follow whatever the most restrictive policy is. So sometimes there isn't a limitation on indirect costs. Note where it says not applicable, it is saying the limitation is not applicable. It is not saying no F&A. This would use the full rate. So here's another example of a solicitation. The first had no limit, whereas these two examples have a direct cost cap and a rate of up to 20% of indirect costs on the first, 25% costs on the second. If an agency's negotiated cost was less, for example, if we were to apply for this and the majority of the research was happening off campus, our rate is 17.8%, which is more restricted. We would not use the 20%, we'd use the 17.8%. This is an example where indirect costs are not allowed at all. It's 0% allowed. This is one that says grant funds cannot be used for the following: facilities and administration costs. That would be a 0%. And sometimes, especially for smaller or newer funders, it's not clear. And in those cases, we would reach out to the program officer, either our office or the principal investigator, if they have that relationship or they've already been talking to them. We would ask. It's good to build that relationship and also have that clarity. It is most likely to be outlined in a federal or state request for proposals, and they are more likely to call it F&A or indirect. Those smaller, newer private sponsors don't always call it F&A or indirect, which is what the university tends to call it. But when you ease them into it with the idea of overhead, they are more receptive and answer a little easier and do not get frustrated that we are using confusing terms. Once you know your rate, it's time to enter it into the budget. Our office does have an internal budget template. I know it scares a lot of people, but it is hefty in order to make it do the math for you. No two budgets are the same, so we have tried to account for lots of different categories, lots of different options. Obviously, we can't pad it and buffer for everything, but we do try to make it do a lot of the math for you. And it is very easy when you are calculating modified total direct costs. As a quick tangent, it's not always useful if you have a small grant you are applying for. It is not required, it is just a resource. But if it is a 1 year simple budget where there's not a lot of multiplication involved or figuring out your categories, don't make it more complicated and use a crazy spreadsheet. This is enough for us to go on for the budget. Justification is another story, but this is enough for us to understand what you are budgeting. As another aside, just because it happened to show up today in a grant I was helping someone work on, sometimes there is an unusual cost basis for indirect costs. If you don't feel confident editing the budget template or editing formulas, let us do that for you. We're not trying to be scary. We're trying to support and take out some of the pain of a painful, long process. And so this example allowed 20% of indirect costs, but we could only apply it to personnel costs. And that does include salaries, wages, and fringe. So I did have to modify the template for that unit to only assess indirect costs on those categories instead of the normal modified total direct costs. When you know your indirect cost rates, there's one cell near the bottom of the internal template where you edit that percent. It defaults to the full on-campus rate, but all you have to do is type in the percent, 0%, 20%, 25%, whatever it is. And when it is modified total direct costs, you don't have to change anything. Again, if it is total direct costs or a weird subset, let us know. And last but not least, the justification. Justifications can vary from sponsor to sponsor, from person to person. Sometimes there's a template, sometimes there's not. There are wrong ways to do a justification, but there's not just one right way to do a justification. For indirect costs, it's pretty standard to take the language from the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, saying whether the work is on campus or off campus, what the rate we are using, if it is one of our negotiated rates. If it is a restricted rate, we would say what we are using based on the solicitation and what is included in the basis for calculating indirect costs. And that's really all there is to it for indirect costs when it comes to budgeting. It's really about knowing what numbers to use and making sure that you are accounting for them in your budget when necessary.